Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The weather station looked smaller the day I decided to stay. It sat on a low rise northeast of Cheyenne, Wyoming, a squat metal box beside a skeletal instrument tower and a fenced compound. Open shortgrass prairie spread in every direction. A gravel access road wound in from a service gate off Interstate 80, then dead-ended at the station. No trees, no buildings, no real cover at all. Under normal circumstances, that made the work boring. After the outbreak, it was the only reason I was still breathing. My name is Daniel Harlow. Before the world fell apart, I was an electronics technician for the National Weather Service. My job was to drive out to remote automated weather stations, check the sensors, swap out parts, troubleshoot whatever the last storm had tried to tear off the tower, and then drive back into town. The Archer Ridge Station was one of our loneliest sites. A single prefabricated module on steel piers, bolted to a concrete pad, with a 10-meter tower carrying anemometers, a wind vane, temperature shield, humidity probes, and a satellite dish. The whole compound was maybe 60 feet on a side, wrapped in chain-link fence with barbed wire on top. The day the alerts started, I was in that station replacing a corroded charge controller for the battery bank. My truck sat outside the fence, hood up, laptop balanced on the fender while I watched output from the new controller. The satellite link in the rack cabinet went from blinking status lights to a solid, frozen pattern. The data stream died. My phone lost connection. Then the emergency alerts started scrolling. Not the usual tornado or blizzard warnings, but national alerts, civil disturbances, violent behavior, containment zones. At first, I did what I was trained to do. I checked the radios. I tried the Cheyenne office, I tried regional. Nothing but bursts of clipped voices, overlapping panic, and then silence. Interstate 80, half a mile to the south, clogged up in less than an hour. At first, I heard horns, engines revving, distant yelling carried by the wind. Then there was a long stretch of nothing. No traffic, no aircraft, no normal. I could have tried to drive back into town. I almost did. I stood by the station door, keys in my hand, looking at the empty sky and the line of motionless vehicles on the horizon. Then I looked back at the station. I knew every bolt in its frame, every cable in its racks. It had solar panels, a battery array, a small diesel generator with a nearly full fuel tank, a deep ground well with an electric pump, and 1,000 gallons of potable water in a buried poly tank. It had a clear view of everything in a full circle, and most important, it had no neighbors. I unlocked the heavy steel door again and stepped back inside. The interior was unfinished metal. The ceiling rafters were exposed. Medium gray insulation panels filled the wall cavities, some stained from old condensation leaks. The floor was solid, coated in non-slip epoxy. The main room held a workbench, a single bunk bolted to one wall, a narrow table with 2 chairs, and the equipment rack for data loggers, radios, and the satellite modem. In the back was a tiny mechanical room with the battery bank and breaker panels, plus a closet barely big enough for a composting toilet and a plastic sink tied into a gray water holding tank. The station had always felt temporary. Suddenly, I needed it to be permanent. The first week, I focused on what I knew best: power. The solar panels were mounted on a low rack, angled toward the southern sky, with the battery bank inside the mechanical room. The batteries were old, but serviceable. Sealed lead-acid cells, 24 volts nominal. The original wiring had suffered from years of minor corrosion and quick repairs. I tore it all out. I crimped new lugs, cleaned bus bars with a wire brush, added extra fuses, and a manual disconnect I could reach without climbing over anything. While I worked, I kept a portable radio on the bench. Static. Occasionally, a voice would break through, distorted and distant, calling for help or issuing instructions meant for a different time. I heard references to infected, to bite wounds, to quarantine lines that did not hold. None of it sounded like the kind of emergency you solve with a snowplow and some sandbags. At night, I shut off every light, even the small indicator lamps on the rack. I taped over LEDs and covered the windows with spare aluminum paneling I found in storage. I knew from maintenance logs that no one was scheduled to visit this site for at least a month. If I kept quiet and the station stayed dark, there was a chance no one would remember it existed. The windows were my first real worry. The unit had come from the factory with double-glazed panes, but years of thermal stress and wind had cracked the seals. One pane was missing entirely. Glass shards lay in the sill. The opening faced west, toward the highway, where the sunset could turn the room into a bright rectangle visible for miles. That had to go. In the equipment yard, beside spare towers and rusted mounting brackets, I found a stack of unused chain-link fencing panels, the kind you bolt together into temporary barricades around construction sites. I dragged them inside one by one, using a dolly with half-flat tires. With a welder from my truck and a crate of electrodes, I cut the panels down and welded heavy wire mesh into frames that matched the inside of each window opening. The welds were ugly, but they held. I anchored each frame to the steel studs around the window with self-tapping screws. From the outside, the windows vanished behind the weathered aluminum sheets and sun-bleached insulation. From the inside, the mesh gave me a second line of defense if anyone or anything tried to break through. The door was next. The main exterior door was solid, but the interior side of the frame had always been exposed. I built a secondary door just inside the first, swung the other way, using 2 full fencing panels cut to size. I welded a cross brace into them and bolted the assembly into a heavy steel frame anchored to the wall studs. When both doors were closed, anyone trying to force their way in would have to defeat 2 separate systems while standing in a narrow entry space. I put the station's old weather balloons to a new use. I sliced them into sheets and layered them over the interior mesh to reduce drafts. Then I taped all seams and corners with aluminum duct tape. The station was never going to be airtight, but I could at least keep most of the wind out. Out here, wind was constant. It rattled loose panels, vibrated the tower, and seemed to find every tiny gap and amplify it until it sounded like the whole structure was tearing apart. I discovered that firsthand on the first real high-wind event after I committed to staying. The forecast, back when forecast still meant anything, had called for a strong pressure gradient across the plains. Even without updated models, I could see it forming on the instruments. Pressure dropped. Wind speed climbed steadily through the afternoon. Gusts rocked the tower, setting off small alarms in the logger. The station had been designed for this, but design margins do not always survive years of underfunded maintenance. By sundown, constant wind was slamming the western wall hard enough to make the shelves vibrate. I moved through the interior, checking fasteners by feel, tightening loose bolts with a ratchet. The roof panels drummed, the metal siding creaked. One especially strong gust made the entire building shift in a way I did not like. I stepped outside with my headlamp off and my small rifle slung across my back. The wind hit hard, cold and dry, carrying dust that stung my eyes. I squinted up at the tower. The upper guy wires hummed like distant lines from a power substation. The solar rack flexed. One of the corner brackets had started to tear free from the concrete anchor. I jogged over and dropped to my knees, working by touch. I could not afford to let a solar panel break free and turn into a sheet of glass and silicon flying across the prairie. I loosened the damaged bracket, replaced the anchor bolts with spares from my truck, and added a temporary brace made from angle iron and heavy hose clamps. It took longer than it should have because I kept stopping to scan the perimeter. The wind masked other sounds, but my mind supplied them anyway. Every creak sounded like a footstep. Every scrape of gravel became imagined movement. I forced myself to focus on the work. When I came back inside, my hands were numb and my jacket was dusted with sand. I logged the wind event in the old paper logbook. It felt pointless. No one was collecting this data anymore. No one was adjusting models. Still, writing it down gave my day structure. Time without tasks feels like falling. Filling in lines of neat block letters kept me from staring at the walls. Food was the next problem. The station had a few pallets of bottled water, some cases of military rations, and a shelf of long-expired canned soup. Enough to get me through a few weeks if I rationed carefully, not enough to last through a winter. I needed a supply line, but leaving the station meant exposure. I picked my target carefully. About 3 miles to the south, at the interstate exit we used for access, there was a small truck stop and gas station. A single concrete building with a convenience store, restrooms, and a couple of diesel pumps. I had been there dozens of times. I knew its layout. The station manager had once complained that the cooler seals leaked so badly that ice built up on the floor in winter. I remembered that detail because it told me the cooler doors would be easy to pry open. I waited 3 days after the last confirmed broadcast before making the first run. I packed my hiking pack with rope, a compact bolt cutter, a few basic tools, a small medical kit, and water. I also took my primary weapon, a semi-automatic rifle chambered in 5.56 with a fixed 4-power optic and a sling that let me keep my hands free when I needed them. I carried a handgun as a backup and a simple wooden walking stick. Overkill maybe, but I was going into the unknown. The terrain between the station and the highway was mostly flat, with shallow drainage channels and patches of slightly higher ground. The grass reached mid-calf. There were no trees, no large rocks, nothing big enough to hide behind. That worked both ways. I could be seen, but so could anything moving toward me. I left at first light, staying low and moving in short bursts between the subtle rises in the land. I avoided the gravel access road. Vehicles leave tracks. People follow tracks. The wind helped cover my sound, but it also pulled at my hat and made my eyes water. I listened constantly, pausing every 100 yards to scan a full circle through binoculars. When I reached the berm beside the interstate, I lay on my stomach and slowly raised my head until I could see over the crest. The highway looked wrong in a way I had not prepared for. Lanes in both directions were clogged with vehicles stopped at odd angles. Some had collided. Others had simply been abandoned in place. A few hoods stood open where people had tried to fix something and then given up. The long, clean lines of moving traffic that had always been in the background of my work were gone. I dragged myself along the berm until I could see the truck stop. Its parking lot held a few cars and 2 tractor trailers. One trailer sat skewed across several spaces, its cab door open. The building's front windows were intact but dark. No movement. No sound. I watched for a full 10 minutes. Nothing changed. When I finally approached the truck stop, I did it from the back, circling through a drainage ditch that ran behind the building. A metal service door opened onto a small concrete pad and some dumpsters. The dumpsters stank even in the wind, which told me that whatever had been thrown away in the last days before the collapse had never been collected. The service door was locked. I used the bolt cutters. The snipped shackle hit the concrete and seemed too loud, but nothing moved. Inside, a narrow hallway led to the kitchen area. I checked each corner with the rifle at my shoulder, listening for breathing, for a foot scrape, for anything. The silence had weight. The main store area looked like a photograph frozen in time. Shelves stood stocked. The coffee machines on the counter were dry. A few cups lay on the floor near the register. The big glass windows looked out onto a parking lot filled with empty vehicles and blowing dust. I raided the place like a methodical burglar. I focused on dense calories, canned beans, peanut butter, energy bars, trail mix, powdered drink mix. I ignored anything refrigerated or frozen. Without reliable refrigeration, there was no point. I filled my pack, then filled a large plastic tote and stashed it in the hallway to pick up later. I took batteries, basic first aid supplies, a box of disposable lighters, and a stack of heavy-duty trash bags. I found a legit water filter device in the camping aisle, probably something a traveler had purchased and then returned. I took that too. On my way out, I hesitated by the cooler doors. A voice in the back of my mind told me not to risk it. The other voice, the one counting calories in future days, won. I pried open a door with my shoulder and the walking stick, then quickly grabbed sealed blocks of cheese, vacuum-packed meats, and a carton of eggs that somehow felt cold. I knew they would not last long, but they would let me eat something that felt normal for a few days. I made it back to the station without seeing another person close enough to worry about. Far to the west, near a cluster of vehicles on the shoulder, I saw movement that did not look like normal walking. People staggered in odd arcs, bumping off fenders and guardrails. I stayed low and did not linger. In the weeks that followed, I fell into a routine. I reinforced the station a little more every day. I added steel brackets to interior corners, bolted shelves directly into the frame, and used sandbags to create a low barrier around the base of the interior door. I rigged a manual ventilation system by repurposing a length of galvanized ducting and an old inline fan from the storage closet. Because the main air intake for the mechanical room had been prone to dust infiltration, I built a filter box using furnace filters stacked in a plywood case with a removable lid. Air came in high, passed through the filters, and then traveled down to the living space. I tested the well pump periodically, running it just long enough to top off the internal tanks. The water came up cold and clear. I ran a basic field test kit on it, confirming no contamination. As a redundant backup, I rigged a small rain catch system off the leeward side of the roof, guttering into a pair of blue plastic drums I scavenged from a nearby farm equipment depot. The days were long and quiet. Too quiet. With the satellite link down, there were no incoming messages. The television mounted in the corner of the main room stayed dark. My phone became a paperweight. I found myself listening to the building as if it were a living thing, learning the pattern of its creaks and rattles so well that any new sound stood out instantly. The first infected I saw up close appeared about 2 weeks in. I had gone onto the roof to inspect a seam I suspected was leaking. From that elevated vantage, I could see more of the land around the station. Heat shimmered in low waves off the prairie. The highway in the distance looked like a rusted necklace of vehicles. Then, something moved between 2 tractor trailers. At first, I thought it was just a person who'd stayed with their vehicle, late to leave the area. But the movement was wrong. The figure lurched along the shoulder, veering into the lane, then back, as if pulled by invisible currents. It stopped and stood perfectly still for a moment, then suddenly turned and walked directly into a car, rebounding off the fender without putting out its hands. After a few seconds, it resumed, moving in another direction with no visible purpose. I watched through binoculars, my mouth dry. I had heard the word infected, but this was the first time I attached a face to it. Even at that distance, I could see that something fundamental in the way that person's brain controlled their body had changed. They were not alone. 3 more figures emerged from between vehicles, drifting like debris in a slow current. Wind pushed at their clothing. None of them seemed to notice. I climbed back down the ladder slowly, careful not to silhouette myself. I stayed away from the windows for the rest of the day. That night, I slept with my rifle leaning against the bunk within easy reach. Time blurred. The sky cycled through clear blue, layered cloud, and the bruised, heavy look that precedes storms. I tracked temperature, humidity, pressure, and rainfall as if someone still cared. I read manuals. I cleaned tools. I walked to the perimeter inside the fence, boots crunching on gravel, eyes on the horizon. Isolation kept me alive, but it also started to grind me down. The human brain does not like silence for that long. To keep myself sane, I talked out loud while I worked, narrating tasks as if I were training a new technician. I made checklists on clipboards and pretended someone would audit them. I even gave names to certain noises. A particular squeak in the western wall I named for the technician who had installed those panels years earlier, as if blaming him for not tightening one more screw. The arrival of other people ended that routine in a single afternoon. It happened on a day of low clouds and scattered drizzle, when the ceiling sat so close to the ground that the horizon vanished into gray. I was in the mechanical room, checking electrolyte levels in the battery bank using a hydrometer, when I heard something that did not belong. A faint shout carried by the wind, then another closer. I closed the mechanical room door, shut off the overhead light, and moved quietly to the tiny observation slit I had left above one of the window panels. It was just a narrow gap I could uncover from the inside. Through it, I could see the gravel access road and the outer gate. 3 figures were moving along the road toward the station fence, bent forward into the wind. They wore backpacks and jackets. One carried what looked like a hunting rifle slung over their shoulder. At that distance, they could have been just about anyone. What mattered was that they were human, alive, and heading straight for my gate. "Hey!" one of them shouted. "Hey! Is someone there?" Their voice was thin in the wind, but clear enough. Another person waved both arms high, trying to make themselves look bigger. The third lagged a few steps behind, head down. My first instinct was to step away from the window and pretend I was not home. My second instinct, the one I'd hoped would stay quiet forever, reminded me that more humans meant more noise, more smell, more movement. All of that attracted attention I could not afford. They reached the gate and rattled it. The chain and padlock I had added clanked against the posts. "Oh, come on," one of them said, breathless. "There has to be someone here. The tower is still running." They were right. As long as the anemometers spun and the solar panels gleamed, the station advertised itself as active. I could have shut the tower down entirely, but that would mean giving up my early warning system and the little piece of normal routine that kept me anchored. The one with the rifle slung over his shoulder cupped his hands and called out again. "We are not infected. We just need shelter. We will work. We have supplies. Please." I watched them for a full minute. The front 2 were young adults, late 20s maybe. The man with the rifle wore a faded sheriff's department jacket, the county patch barely visible on his shoulder. The woman beside him had a compact frame and the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she was used to long days on her feet. The third person, trailing behind, was older. His left leg dragged slightly, and every few steps he winced. "Quiet down," the woman hissed at the man. "You are going to bring them." "They would be here already," he said, but his voice dropped anyway. "They were already here." I caught the movement out of the corner of my eye, farther out on the prairie near the half-buried remnants of an old fence line. Several figures, free of context, just vertical shapes against the grass. They moved the way the infected by the highway had moved. Erratic angles, sudden stops, no awareness of terrain. The woman saw them next, her hand clamped down on the gate, "We have company," she said. The older man turned slowly, as if his body remembered pain and wanted to avoid it, his face drained of color. The sheriff's jacket man swung the rifle off his shoulder and checked the chamber with a practiced motion. "Inside," he called, looking straight at the station. "Whoever you are, if you can hear me, we could use a hand." I stayed very still. If I opened the gate and let them in, I would have to commit to an entirely new kind of life, one with conversations instead of checklists, arguments instead of silent routines. I would also be inviting their problems inside my perimeter. If I ignored them, there was a good chance I would hear them get overtaken and torn apart within sight of my window. A thought settled heavier than I expected. I moved to the equipment rack and flipped a switch for an exterior speaker. The station had a small public address system we used during maintenance operations. A simple amplifier connected to a horn speaker bolted under the eaves. I turned the gain down low and spoke in a normal tone. "Stop shouting," I said. My voice came out of the wall above their heads. All three flinched and looked up. "Stay at the gate," I continued. "Turn your backs to the station and act like you do not know I am here." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Understood," she said quietly. She turned to face the prairie. The infected were closing in. I counted 6. They staggered over the grass, heads dipping and rising. Wind pushed them off course, but whenever they paused, they seemed to reorient toward the sound of voices. The sheriff's jacket man adjusted his stance, sighted along the rifle, and then froze as my voice reached him again. "Do not fire unless one is within 20 yards, I said. "Muzzle blast carries." I grabbed my own rifle, climbed the ladder to the small roof hatch, and eased it open just enough to set up. From that position, lying prone behind the slate parapet, I had a clear field of fire in a 360-degree arc without exposing more than the top of my head and rifle barrel. The first infected reached the gravel beyond the access road, about 100 yards out. It wore a torn flannel shirt and jeans. Its face was wrong. Mouth slack, eyes unfocused. It tripped on the edge of the ditch, fell, then clawed its way up again without any sign of pain. Another stumbled along behind it. I exhaled slowly, aligned the crosshairs at the base of its neck, and pressed the trigger. The sound was sharp, but not deafening at that distance, flattened by the wind and the open land. The figure crumpled in an instant. The survivors flinched. The sheriff's jacket man glanced up at the station roof and then forced his attention forward again, shoulders tense. I cycled the bolt, found the second infected, and repeated the process. One by one, I engaged only those that were clearly on a path toward the gate. I ignored those that wandered in the wrong direction, letting distance and terrain do the work. After the fourth shot, the remaining infected seemed to lose whatever crude focus they had. 2 veered away. 1 simply stopped and stood still, swaying slightly. "Do not move," I said through the speaker. "Give it 10 minutes." They obeyed. The older man leaned heavily on the gate, breathing hard. The woman took deep, slow breaths, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sheriff's jacket man scanned back and forth with the rifle, safety on. After 10 minutes, nothing new had appeared. "Back away from the gate," I said. "Stand in a line, hands visible, weapons on the ground." They hesitated. Then the woman bent and placed a compact handgun at the gravel. The sheriff's jacket man cleared his rifle and set it down carefully. The older man produced a folding knife from his pocket and looked reluctant to part with it, but finally opened his fingers and let it fall. I climbed down from the roof, moved to the main door, and cycled the exterior camera to ensure no one else had joined them from at an angle I could not see. Then I unlocked the padlock on the gate using a thin secondary chain I had rigged to operate from inside the fence. The gate opened with a groan. "Come in," I said, one at a time. They stepped through, picked up their weapons when I told them to, and approached the station door slowly. I met them in the narrow entry space between the outer and inner doors, with the inner fencing door still in place. The mesh put a physical barrier between us, and I saw them relax slightly at the sight of anything that looked like planning. Up close, they looked worse than they had at a distance. The sheriff's jacket man had dark circles under his eyes. His name patch read Lopez. The woman wore scrubs under a fleece jacket, the kind nurses wear on night shifts to keep warm. Her name badge, still clipped to her collar, said H. Patel, RN. The older man's face was deeply lined. A makeshift brace wrapped his left knee, and dried bandages covered his calf. I kept my rifle slung but visible. "You step back from the mesh," I said. "One at a time, I'm going to look at your eyes and ask a few questions. If you do not like that, the gate is still open." They agreed without argument. Fear makes people practical. I checked them for visible wounds and for the strange vacant gaze I had seen in the infected. I asked how long it had been since any of them had been scratched or bitten during an encounter. They told me they had avoided close contact entirely. Their story, pieced together between them, was simple enough. They had been in town when the first wave hit, had holed up in the county health clinic for a few days, then abandoned it when the generator failed and too many infected started circling the building. They had heard about the weather station from a laminated map in the Emergency Operations Center. The map showed it as a hardened site with independent power, Patel said. Figured if anything was still running, it would be you. I believed them. The clinic, the Emergency Operations Center, the labeled weather station, those were all pieces of a world I recognized. "I have rules," I said. "If you stay, you follow them. No shouting, no lights visible from outside at night. We do not go out without a reason, and we go out one at a time except in extreme emergencies. We keep this place off the radar, understood?" Lopez nodded immediately. "You are not the first person to tell me to keep my voice down," he said. "Understood." Patel gave me a long, searching look, then nodded too. "What about him?" she asked, tilting her head toward the older man. "He needs rest, and I need time to look at that leg properly." I glanced at the bandages again. "We will see what we can do," I said. "For now, come inside and sit. We will talk about how this works." Bringing them into the station changed everything at once. We cleared a corner near the bunk and laid out a spare foam pad for the older man, whose name turned out to be Carl. His leg wound was from a fall through a broken stair at the clinic, not from an encounter with an infected. Patel confirmed that after removing the bandages, cleaning the cuts with sterile saline, and rewrapping them with fresh gauze from my supplies. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times in normal life. Lopez took off his jacket and set his rifle carefully against the wall, barrel down, action open. He looked around the station with a mixture of relief and calculation. "This is a good spot," he said. "You did all this reinforcement yourself?" "With what I had," I said. "There's not exactly a hardware store in walking distance." "You have done more thinking ahead than anyone we have met so far," he said. "You alone out here?" "Until now," I said. "I was not expecting visitors." "We can pull our weight," he said quickly. "I can stand watch, help with security, whatever you need. Patel can handle medical. Carl used to run maintenance at the high school. He can fix anything with moving parts." I believed that too. Carl's eyes were tired but sharp. He'd already spotted a hairline crack in one of my interior welds and mentioned it in a matter-of-fact tone that I appreciated. "We will try it," I said. "But understand this. This place works because no one knows it is here. The more people we have, the more tempting it becomes to start making noise. running the generator all night, broadcasting on every frequency. I will not do that. If that is what you are looking for, you are better off somewhere else." Patel shook her head. "I am looking for 4 walls, drinkable water, and a door I can close," she said. "Anything beyond that is extra." Lopez opened his mouth like he wanted to argue about broadcast signals and calling for help, then looked at the bandage on Carl's leg and closed it again. "All right," he said. "Your house, your rules." The first night with other people inside the station felt strange. Every tiny noise now had a source I could identify. Lopez shifting on the chair where he had insisted on taking first watch near the door. Patel rolling over on her pad near Carl. The quiet hum of the inline fan working a little harder with more carbon dioxide in the air. I slept lighter than usual, dreaming of footsteps on gravel that never quite reached the door. By the 3rd day, we had fallen into a tentative schedule. I showed Lopez the perimeter checks, the grounding straps on the tower, the positions on the roof where I like to lie prone for observation without silhouetting myself. He showed me how to reposition some of the existing fence panels to create a crude funnel leading to the gate, forcing anything coming straight in to squeeze into a narrow space where it was easier to control. Patel took over inventory of medical supplies with an efficiency that would have been intimidating if I had not been so grateful. She found expired but still useful antibiotics in one of the old emergency kits and began a treatment course for Carl's leg to prevent infection. She also cleared a corner of the station and turned it into a small treatment area, with a clean table and a plastic curtain for privacy. Carl, once he could stand without gritting his teeth, made it his mission to reduce the number of mysterious creaks in the building. He tightened bolts, shimmed loose panels, and identified which noises were harmless and which ones meant something was wearing out faster than it should. He also gave me a long lecture about grounding and lightning protection on the tower, which I listened to carefully. Out here, a bad lightning strike would end us as surely as a crowd of infected. For a few days, it almost felt stable. The tension arrived slowly. It centered, as I should have predicted, on the radio. Lopez had been a sheriff's deputy before this all began. He was used to thinking about jurisdiction, responsibility, and communication. The idea of sitting quietly in a secure spot while the rest of the world burned did not sit well with him. "We have a tower," he said one evening, gesturing at the instrument mast outside. "We have power. We have radios. We could at least try to find other people coordinate. There might be a convoy somewhere getting ready to move civilians to a more sustainable location. Or there might be armed groups looking for resources," I said. "We transmit, we paint a target on ourselves. We could use narrow beams, directional antennas," he argued. "Short bursts, scheduled times. It does not have to be a constant broadcast." "Even short bursts travel," I said. "And our antenna is not exactly subtle. Anyone with the right equipment could triangulate us." Patel watched us go back and forth with a tired expression. Carl sat nearby cleaning a small camp stove, clearly listening even if he pretended to focus on the stove. "Let us say you get through to someone," I said. "What then? They say, 'Stay where you are, we will come and get you.' Now we are waiting for a vehicle or helicopter or whatever to arrive. We do not know when. We do not know if whoever hurt us first is the one who shows up. Meanwhile, anyone scanning the same band knows there are people at this coordinate who have enough food and water to last a while. That is an invitation I do not want to send." Lopez frowned. "You cannot hide forever," he said. "At some point, you will need a community." At some point, I agreed. But this is not that point. We are still in the stage where small, quiet targets survive better than big, loud ones. This station was built to be quiet and resilient. That is why I stayed. Patel cleared her throat. If we had a clear sign that there was an organized, functional group within reach, I would say we should at least talk to them, she said. Right now, all we have is static and some very desperate voices. I'm not eager to invite desperation here. Lopez looked away, jaw tight. I just do not like the idea of doing nothing while people are out there, he said quietly. You are not doing nothing, I said. You are keeping this place secure. You are keeping 3 people alive who might not have made it otherwise. That counts. He did not respond, but he stopped pushing the radio idea for a while. Of course, the world does not care about our internal arguments. It sends what it sends. The next threat came not from a distant transmission, but from a simple change in weather. The wind shifted. Up until then, the prevailing wind had come out of the west and northwest, blowing scent and sound away from the highway. Then a strong low-pressure system passed to our north, and the surface winds turned into a steady flow from the southeast. Air that had previously moved from us toward empty land now carried whatever scent we produced straight toward the cluster of stranded vehicles on the interstate. I noticed the shift on the instruments first. Wind direction came around slowly on the display, then held steady. The anemometer cups spun at a decent clip. Outside, a faint odor of stale exhaust and something harder to define slid under the door. That afternoon, while Lopez and I were on the roof inspecting guy wires, we saw a group of infected detach from the highway cluster and begin moving in our direction. It started with 2, then 4, then more. They moved slowly but inexorably, drawn by something they could not have understood, following a scent trail that did not know or care that the source did not want to be found. We have a problem, Lopez said quietly. We knew this day would come, I replied. We climbed down and called Patel and Carl together. I laid out the situation with as little embellishment as possible. There was no point in downplaying it. We have defenses, I said. We have the mesh over the windows, the double doors, the interior barriers. As long as we keep noise and light low, they may just mill around the fence and then wander off. And if they do not? Patel asked. Then we thin them out carefully, I said. 1 at a time if we can. Always from cover, always from the roof or shooting ports. No one goes outside the fence until we have a clear, clean perimeter. Carl exhaled slowly. I have patched gyms after football games, he said. I have fixed leak after leak in the same old boiler. I never thought I would be sitting here talking about a plan to manage this, but we are where we are. As the first infected reached the outer fence, bumping against the chain link with low, dull impacts, I felt the station around me differently. Every bracket, every weld, every sandbag, every improvised reinforcement became suddenly very real. The time I had spent tightening bolts during that first wind event, the extra screws I had driven into door frames, the layers of mesh and aluminum over the windows. They were no longer just tinkering. They were the line between a contained problem and a disaster. The infected pushed and scraped at the fence, fingers catching in the mesh. Some moaned in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Others simply stood and twitched, as if waiting for a command that never came. We moved into positions we had discussed but never actually practiced in a live situation. Lopez took the roof, lying prone with his rifle in a narrow spot that gave him a clear view of the fence line without exposing his silhouette. I stationed myself at one of the interior shooting ports I had cut into the wall, small rectangles just big enough for a rifle barrel, positioned behind stacked sandbags. Patel and Carl stayed in the interior, ready to move supplies, reload magazines, or slam inner doors if needed. "We are going to prioritize the ones actually pulling on the fence," I said over the internal intercom. "No need to clear the whole field. Just keep them from compromising the barrier." "Copy," Lopez said. His voice was steady. We waited until one of the infected yanked hard enough on a section of fence that the post visibly flexed. Then Lopez took the shot. The crack of the rifle echoed inside the station, but outside the wind knocked the sound down. The infected dropped. Another took its place, hands clawing at the same spot. I engaged that one from the side, firing through the shooting port and immediately stepping back to a different angle. We worked like that for what felt like hours, though it was probably less than one. We alternated shots, controlling our fields of fire so we never risked crossing paths. We let some of the infected simply lean against the fence, contributing dead weight that actually helped resist the pushing of others. We focused on those that actively climbed, pulled, or tried to wedge themselves into weaknesses. At one point, 3 of them piled against a corner post that had not been properly reinforced. The chain link began to deform. I swore under my breath, grabbed a spare panel from the yard, and with Carl's help we wedged it against the interior side of the fence, bracing it with sandbags and a steel strut. We worked fast, breath loud in the confined space, hearts pounding. The infected on the other side hissed and reached fingers through the mesh, grazing my sleeve. I jerked back and nearly lost my footing. "Easy," Carl said, voice calm. "You have got it." We did. The corner held. The infected eventually lost interest in that spot and drifted toward another area where their dull instincts told them there might be progress. By late afternoon, the number of infected at the fence had thinned. Some lay where they fell. Others wandered off in confused circles. The constant pressure on the chain link eased. We did not relax until full dark. That night, lying awake on my bunk, I realized something important. The station's defenses had worked. Our planning and reinforcement had made a difference. But the increased number of infected around the site had also permanently changed our risk profile. Even if most of them wandered off, enough would remember, in whatever limited way they remembered anything, that there was something here. The station was no longer just a hidden dot on a map. It was a place in their patterns. In the morning, over instant coffee and peanut butter on crackers, I told the others what I had decided. This station can support a small number of people indefinitely, assuming careful management of food, water, and power, I said. Add many more and that changes. Defense becomes a full-time job. Supplies run out faster. Our signature grows. We got lucky with the win this time. Next time, maybe we do not. Patel nodded slowly. "You are saying this place is not meant to be a community center," she said. "It is a hideout." "It is a sensor platform with a small human support module," I said. "That is what it was built to be, and that is what it is best at being even now. If you want to build a larger group, you need more space, more resources, more room to spread out risk." Lopez looked down at his hands. "You are telling us to leave," he said. "I'm saying you have a choice," I replied. "You can stay here with me, long-term, and accept the limits that come with this kind of life. We stay quiet. We go out only when necessary. We do not broadcast. We do not invite more people in unless the alternative is watching them die at the gate. Or you can take what you have learned here, how to move quietly, how to fortify, how to think about lines of approach, and you can go look for a place better suited to a group. Somewhere near water and arable land. Somewhere with multiple buildings you can harden. Somewhere this station can maybe support from a distance with weather data and a quiet radio link, if we figure out a way to do that without drawing too much attention." Patel considered that for a long time. "If we go," she said, Would you be willing to maintain a schedule? Short, encrypted bursts on a pre-agreed time. We could keep each other updated, share information about weather systems, maybe even infected movement patterns if there is a connection to temperature or pressure. My instinct against broadcasting flared again, but I also saw the value. A tight, controlled protocol with extremely limited exposure could work. Maybe, I said. But if I ever get the sense that the risk outweighs the benefit, I will shut it down. No discussion. This place is the last line for me. I cannot afford to gamble it. That is fair, she said. Carl looked at the walls, the ceiling, the battery room door. I'm not as mobile as I used to be, he said. But I have spent my life making old buildings last longer than anyone thought they could. This place speaks to me. If you will have me, I would like to stay and help keep it running. One pair of eyes on the gauges, one pair on the horizon. I had half expected that. You are welcome, I said, as long as you can tolerate my habits. I've worked with headstrong people before, he replied dryly. You will be fine. Lopez rubbed his face. I do not like leaving a safe place, he said, but you are right. This is not where people rebuild, this is where they hide and watch. I cannot shake the feeling that I am supposed to be out there doing more than that. Then go do it, I said. Take what supplies you need within reason. Take a copy of the old topo maps. Take one of the portable weather sensors if you want. If you find a place that feels right, you can start something. Maybe one day there will be enough structure again that this station can go back to what it was designed for, feeding data to a network larger than itself. He stood and held out his hand. You ever think about coming along? He asked. I shook his hand firmly. Every day, I said. And every day I look at the tower and the instruments and the horizon, and I remember why I am here. My skill set is built for places like this. I would be more liability than asset in a crowded town trying to reorganize. But out here, I can track storms, watch for cold snaps, and warn you when conditions shift. That matters too. Patel smiled faintly. The hermit of Archer Ridge, she said, keeping the sky in check while the rest of us scrape in the dirt. I prefer remote systems technician, I replied, but call it what you want. They left 3 days later, on a clear morning with shallow cumulus clouds drifting in a blue sky. We loaded a small utility trailer with carefully selected supplies: food, water containers, basic tools, a spare deep-cycle battery, a compact solar panel, and the portable weather sensor unit I had reluctantly detached from the tower. Lopez took point with his rifle. Patel walked beside the trailer handle, shoulders squared. They promised to move at a measured pace, avoid main roads where possible, and stay off the skyline. Before they left, we agreed on a simple radio protocol. Once every 2 weeks, at an exact time referenced to the station's atomic synchronized clock, they would transmit a short burst on a specific frequency, using a low-power handheld radio connected to a directional antenna fashioned from wire and wood. The burst would be no more than a few sentences. Location relative to known landmarks, general status, and any urgent requests. I would listen with my own directional antenna aimed along the path they expected to travel. If conditions allowed and the risk seemed acceptable, I would respond with weather information for the next several days. When they walked through the gate and headed toward the low line of hills to the east, I felt a tug in my chest I had not expected. I was not a social person even before all this. I had chosen a career that kept me out among instruments and machines. Yet the brief taste of shared responsibility, of voices other than my own echoing in the cramped station, had awoken something I had not realized I missed. Carl stayed. He settled into the bunk without complaint and divided his time between meticulous maintenance tasks and quiet observation of the horizon. We shared work without needing many words. It was a good fit. Life at the station settled into a new pattern. We stayed hidden. We kept noise minimal, lights shielded, routines predictable. We reinforced the fence further, adding extra bracing where the infected had pushed hardest. We buried a second ring of wire farther out, not enough to entangle, but enough to make movement awkward, buying us extra seconds if anything ever made a determined rush toward the gate. We monitored the instruments, logging temperature, humidity, pressure, wind speed, and direction, even though no central server was collecting the data. And every 2 weeks, at the appointed time, we listened. The first scheduled radio burst came through faint but clear. Patel's voice, slightly distorted by the simple encryption method we used to scramble the audio, described a temporary camp near a river crossing, some miles east of a town I knew from the maps. They had found a farmstead with intact buildings and a functioning well. They were assessing soil and fences. No immediate danger. No signs of organized hostile groups yet. I responded with a brief forecast. A cold front due in 2 days, with strong winds and a sharp temperature drop. I kept my transmission short, my power low, my antenna focused. Then I shut the radio off and disconnected it from the external line. Out on the prairie, the station's tower turned slowly in the wind, instruments tracking a sky that no longer fed data anywhere. Inside, we moved through the now well-rehearsed motions of daily life, checking panel outputs, tightening seams, patching minor leaks, updating the logbook. Sometimes, when the wind was just right and the light hit the highway at a certain angle, I could see infected still wandering among the vehicles, drifting like debris in a slow-moving stream. They rarely came close anymore. Our scent, such as it was, rose into the air and dispersed. The station, at a distance, looked like an unremarkable box on a rise. That was how I wanted it. I know there will come a day when I have to leave. Age, injury, or simple degradation of the systems will force a change. No structure lasts forever, no matter how well maintained. But until that day, this remote weather station remains a kind of anchor point in a world that lost most of its reference frames. I reinforced it with steel and mesh and sandbags. I reinforced it with routines and rules and quiet discipline. I stayed hidden not because I do not care what happens beyond the horizon, but because someone needs to be in a place like this, watching the sky, listening to the wind, tracking the subtle shifts that still matter even when most of civilization has forgotten why. And sometimes, when the radio crackles at the agreed-upon time and I hear Patel's voice reporting that their small settlement has harvested its first crop, or that they have taken in another group and managed to integrate them without chaos, I allow myself to imagine a future where this station goes back to its original purpose, sending weather data to a network of towns and cities that can use it again. Until then, I will remain here, keeping the station quiet, keeping myself alive, and staying just far enough from the noise that the infected rarely remember I exist. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.